One. Hi, this is Hart Hagan, and this is Let's Talk. We're a local radio show on Forward Radio 106.5 FM in Louisville, and I'm joined today by Danita Wright, Deanna Rushing, and Christy Collins. How y'all doing today? How's your day been going?
Fine. Doing good.
Good. So one thing we're going to talk about, now we're going to talk about the COVID-19 epidemic and how that's being handled, the pandemic. But first we're going to talk about something that Christy and I have been talking about a lot, which is I call it the Bullitt County Pipeline. So if you've seen the signs that say Save Bernheim Forest, that's not a tenth of the story. Bernheim Forest is, in one view, is only a part of the story. In my view, a small part. At least I had not heard the full story until I started talking with Christy and some of the other landowners. So, Christy, correct me if I'm wrong on this. The court documents, public records, are as well as an article by Ryan Van Velzer of WFPL, as well as an article by Marcus Green of WDRB, are saying that Jim Beam, the bourbon distiller, wants LG&E to build a pipeline, and the pipeline's going to cost $24 million, and they want us to pay for it. Now, you would think that if they're going to build a $24 million pipeline that's going to serve primarily one customer, that it would be paid for by that customer. But Jim Beam doesn't want to pay for it, and they're asking us to pay for it. So that's only one problem with that. Another problem with it is that it has an impact on water quality. So Christy is a building inspector and also a caver. And she knows about this karst, the cave formations, that it's the reason Kentucky has a lot of caves, and also the reason we have an increasing number of sinkholes is that the water runs through this soft sandstone and limestone, and ultimately it's just a brittle understructure, and they want to build a pipeline across that. Another thing about this pipeline is that they want to pay landowners a song, and I mean a song, for building an easement through. So an easement is like a right to do certain things on a property, and you might have a farm that's worth several $100,000, and they want to pay you $10,000 for taking half of it or a third of it. And so we could go on and on and on. So, Christy, what am I missing here? What are some of the aspects of this story with Jim Beam and LG&E that are somewhat scandalous and should be more public knowledge?
Oh gosh, there's so many. I guess first, because they preyed on the disabled.
How did that happen? I'm sorry I interrupted, but how did that happen?
Well, they picked them first. It's like, I don't know if they did a study or what they did, but they picked the disabled or the illiterate or the blind, and they harassed them first to get easement agreements. That's how they secured them. After talking with several of the landowners and different things, those were the ones that signed the first, because they were telling them, hey, we're going to take your land. You're not going to be able to own anything. We're going to take your house. You won't have nothing. You need to sign. And I can only imagine in them circumstances at that degree that, you would feel like you would have no choice. You're already on limited income. You're in poor health. And then that's what they harass you with. Not only that, but our judge executive, he worked for Jim Beam. He's the one that pushed for it in the county. That was another point. And at one point, he was still on their tourism or travel committee while he was the judge executive. That was another point. The way they harass the landowners, like Vanessa or Kim or different ones, is, one of the ladies, she has a signed agreement from LG&E where they harassed her.
So let's talk about this alleged harassment. We're talking about the pipeline is going to be, the proposed pipeline is going to be 11 to 14 miles long, depending on the path that they take. LG&E has been going through and trying to get people to sign away or their rights at least to have a pipeline built across the property. And you're because it's 11 to 14 miles, you're dealing with several hundred property owners. And so you're saying that LG&E hired, or somebody hired
General
a
Energy.
yeah hired people to go in and you say, we want you to sign here because we want to build a pipeline, and you're saying that the people that they got to sign something included at least one individual who was illiterate, some people who are disabled, etc. So is that what we're talking about here?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Wow.
So what else can we say about that? And then one thing that seems to be going on in this case is that, is the Energy and Environment Cabinet doing its job? Is the Department of Water doing its job? Is the Public Service Commission doing its job? Can we talk about some of that?
The PSC, I really do not feel like they did, but it is in litigation, so I can't really speak about that. We are in current cases with the EEC. There are certain provisions that the EEC does that are not being followed. I can say that, but we are in a hearing with that to try to get that rectified and these permits rescinded at this point. Because you've got karst, you've got sinkholes, you've got sinking streams and failure streams. None of that's been taken into consideration. No dye tracing, none of that. I mean, and you've got permits out there where they haven't done a GPP, they've not done a SOP, none of that.
So we're talking, for one thing, we're talking about water quality. So one hazard of building this pipeline is the impact on water quality. Another hazard is that if you build a pipeline, the construction process is bound to, cause some caving in to take place. So talk to me.
If you've already got karst and sinkholes, and they went out there and they illegally drilled 12 wells without a permit from the EEC or Division of Water to 300 feet, which it was the pipeline's only supposed to be 6 feet. Why you're drilling to 300 feet?
Well, what are the possibilities? Why would they be drilling to 300 feet if they are just like surveying, or if they're just going to build a pipeline that's 6 feet underground?
At that point, unless they knew specifically that there was methane, I do not know. It's illogical, especially to do that without a permit.
So how far back does this story go?
2016 at least, if not longer.
Right. So Jim Beam apparently, according to court documents, wants a pipeline to be built at our expense. And then and then you're a caver, so you know about caves and things, underground formations. And so what would you want people to know about this story?
Well, all the groundwater and all the karst, all the sinkholes, it eventually flows out into your streams and creeks, for one, which will eventually flow into the Salt River, which will go into the Ohio River, which is already polluted. So when you look at it at that aspect, and when there was no groundwater testing, there's no watershed testing and no dye tracing, which some of these creeks and streams are already inundated with E. coli from non-source point contacts. Why would you go any further at that point when you have endangered species, endangered plants on unstable soil and grounds and try to shove a pipeline right through there? I mean, the emissions from the pipeline in that groundwater and that karst and not knowing where that goes, it could go like several subdivisions over. No one knows.
Danita and Deanna, you're a little bit newer to this story maybe than Christy and I are.
This is interesting.
Yeah, do you have some questions or comments or observations? Do you have any questions for Christy on about this?
Is there any help for these people with no voice?
Me and a few of the other landowners here speaking out that have withheld and have not signed lease easement agreements.
Has there been any attempts to unify the public, that
We have,
whole area?
they're more for Burnham because I mean that's a beautiful natural park and everyone knows that. So more people are more apt to help Burnham, which is great. I mean, I'm
Yeah,
helping Burnham
anything you can do.
because we've all got to work together.
So
But
they are on board with saving Burnham. If they save Burnham, it will help save the rest of the community.
well, Burnham's on board with helping saving the 480 wildlife corridor, which goes so far. So if you help Burnham, yes, it does help them, but inadvertently, if they missed Burnham and went around Burnham, it's still going to hurt the rest of it.
Mm.
One thing I would like for Burnham to be talking about more is that a natural preserve does not stand alone. It's like a natural preserve is not a very good island. You can't make the wildlife stay within the natural preserve. Bees, butterflies, and birds don't know where a fence is. They don't know what's Burnham and what's a private landowner. So ultimately, the ecological health of Burnham is going to depend on the ecological health of the surrounding areas. And if Burnham is just saying, I'm not saying they're bad people, but like if it's all about save Burnham, you build this pipeline, just not in my backyard, then I think that's missing a big opportunity to talk about there shouldn't be a pipeline anywhere because of ecological health, because of water quality, because of climate. I mean, let's talk about climate just a minute. If you're in a hole and you want to get out, the first thing you do is stop digging. So the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is telling us that we have until 2030 to seriously, drastically reduce our carbon output. And okay, so meanwhile, LG&E wants to build a brand new pipeline that's supposed to last decades.
They are saying 480 corridor. So I just don't know what the parameters of the 480 corridor is.
Right.
And this pipeline is only for Jim Beam.
Yes. Well, now after the fact, they're saying a few builders want to tap in for, like maybe 50 houses, but there's no plan certains. There's no subdivision plats or dockets on the case. No permits have been rejected at this point. So at that point, is there really builders and subdivisions out there if there's not plan certains and subdivisions recorded?
Right.
So you're saying somebody would be hard put to prove that Jim Beam is not the only customer.
I would say Jim Beam is the only main customer. It's always been the main customer. It will probably always be because Jim Beam, I mean, they even have a sign that says Bullock County is Beam County.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Well,
maybe-
petrochemical profits, LNG and oil profits are down anywhere since January. They're down like 45 to 70%. And the COVID virus is basically just, putting ultimate stress on these industries that were already in decline because they're just unsustainable. Oil would have to drop to $11 a barrel to compete with solar and wind energy right now. I don't think they're going to be able to recover post-COVID, truly. I've been doing a lot of reading. There's a Center for International Environmental Law paper they wrote in April that just kind of comprehensively says there's just no way for them to bounce back unless a few governments prop them up.
Well, greed is the staple point right now with our government.
Mm-hmm.
And so greed may drive them to help out. Socialism for the rich is on the rise. And even though, and that's so funny that, they're
Let's
against
talk
socialism.
about socialism for the rich. That's my favorite topic. So this pipeline is socialism for the rich.
Yes. Sounds
Jim
like,
Beam wanting us to pay for it, that's socialism for the rich.
Right.
I'm sure Christy could tell stories about socialism for the rich. Isn't there like a tax exemption, like Jim Beam is exempt from paying school taxes, or exempt from property taxes because they're, oh, you don't want it.
No, I mean, there's property taxes, but not only that, there's state taxes where they're exempt from.
Hmm.
So they're double dipping on that one.
Sound like Churchill Downs.
Oh, yes.
Wow.
So Danita, talk to me about socialism for the rich. How does that work?
Socialism for the rich. Well, you've got capitalism, and yet capitalism seems to feed off of socialism.
Right.
So without socialism to boost that capitalism, just like Deanna was saying, they can't sustain themselves. And the only way that they can is the use of socialism, the use of our monies. So, but when you use it's funny, if you use socialism for the poor, if you use it in that term, you get all of this, no, it's such a bad thing. Stay away from socialism, But let it be for the rich, and it's okay. It's okay.
Can you give me some examples?
I can.
Yeah, okay.
The petrochemical industry is the biggest lobbyist right now for that money that they just passed to help small business and to help corporations. They are the one with the biggest hat out for a bailout.
In the stimulus bill?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the stimulus, yeah.
Hmm.
Yes,
I
sir.
agree. Tell me more.
Go ahead, Deanna.
Deanna, you're on mute. Okay.
Sorry. I'll get right to you here. I'll be right back with that.
Okay.
Okay. But remember back in, before Obama, the fall of, we lost the rating and everything behind the greed there on Wall Street, and they had to use socialism to bail out the banks,
Right.
And I'm just saying that a lot of things came to light. Especially what was so scary was the Federal Reserve saying, I dare you to check into us. And I was just sent chills down me, who is running this country, but it's just like taking candy from a baby. The so-called socialism of today is like taking candy from a baby. The greed in this country has gotten so bad that the poor they're just getting poorer, and the richest they're just getting richer. All, believe it or not, the poor.
So
Not-
I like saying,
off the poor.
right. So I like saying that we have to rethink everything. We have to rethink what we were taught in school. If Martin Luther King said we have socialism for the rich and rugged individualism for the poor and the middle class, rugged individualism for everybody else. So what we're taught in school and in the media is that we have this free enterprise system, for one thing. I call it a monopoly enterprise system because it's all the biggest companies that the big fish get bigger while they swallow up the small fish. And in a functioning society, we would break up the big companies. In a functioning society, we would limit what the big companies can
Exactly.
do, because if you let the big fish swallow up the little fish, then it ends up there aren't any little fish anymore, and the big fish don't have any competition. So we need to question what we've been taught about the American economy. We need to question what we've been taught about American history. I mean, American history, you never hear really. I mean, if the myth is that our economy is strong because of our freedom, and you get out there and you hustle and you win some and you lose some, but in the end, it's all, well, okay, we're sitting on land that was stolen. They were sitting on stolen land, for one thing. Much of the wealth of early America was built on the backs of slaves. So you steal the land and the lives of Native Americans, you steal the lives and the freedom of African Americans, and then we've stolen oil and other natural resources. I mean, if you look at the global South, if you look at Latin America, if you look at South Asia, if you look at Africa, these are places that exist to be exploited. They exist for us to extract their natural resources.
Yeah.
Anything called free trade is fraud trade. It's not free. It's
Right.
like, you know, we subsidize crops, and so that we can put Mexican farmers out of business and Haitian farmers out of business. There's just hardly anything that we've been told about our economy is true. Hardly anything we've been told about wealth and poverty is true. So we need to rethink everything, and we need to stop believing the myth that we have a meritocracy. We need to stop believing that capitalism is anything but predatory. I mean, there might be some types of small scale capitalism that are good and healthy, but that's not what we have.
America's Constitution amazes me because it states that you give to help each other. You know, that the capitalism that they thought about was, I believe, it was actually socialism. It's supposed to be, right now we live under a capitalistic system with a socialistic concept. And I think when it started, it was supposed to be a socialistic system with a capitalistic concept. So I think somewhere along the way, somebody turned that upside down. They flipped the switch, you know, because of the first thing it says in the Constitution. It says, we the people of these United States, we are here to give the general welfare, not in those terms, not in those, but it states to give the general, to provide for the general welfare of the people. That's what it states, to provide for the general welfare of the people. So, and when they talk about, if your government is not acting right, you have the right to dissolve that government, it's still talking about the people. Not that had anything to do with rich and poor. It's the people, all of us together. And I just think it just got flipped. I've heard of socialism, but I think this system that they started out with, to get one perfect union, I think it was great. It was a great. I haven't seen the socialism that the Constitution speaks of in any other form. I know they, you know, and it has something to do with, like, everybody makes the same and stays the same. But according to the Constitution, make as much as you want, but the focus is on the poor, not the rich, the poor. Make sure the poor is taken care of, but make as much money as you want. But the focus is on the poor. I think that was an extraordinary concept.
Okay, great. So what else do y'all want to talk about?
Did you hear about the tsunami coming to West Louisville?
Wait, Deanna was going to talk about petrochemicals.
Oh,
Now I want to know about the tsunami.
no, I didn't know he started it.
Well, I was kind of talking about a tsunami, you know, because I was saying that this pandemic really is the sort of the icing on the cake, because it's a perfect storm, because the petrochem and plastics fracking industries have always been, the fracking industry has never been profitable. And the upfront costs of both industries are so high that they basically have to go into debt to keep them operational. And I was going to talk about the radon poisoning just from pipelines, but that was suggested.
Well, it seems like, I mean, later. Deanna, it seems like if an industry is not profitable, why are we propping them up?
Well, we, the people, are getting jobs from them. But right now, you may have noticed that you can get a gallon of gas for $1.30 right now, $1.49, $1.30. And that continued low price is indicative of we're at storage capacity, where we can't get people to take our oil or gas. And there's such a glut that, like in 2014, it took 2 years to draw down. They drew down from the supply that, the stockpile that we had for over 2 years before it could be regulated in a normal fashion. This is like exponentially worse than 2014 was on that sector. So I really think that if we just continue to point out the problems with the industry, I think it is crippled, and I think we just have to keep hammering at the corpse, if so to speak.
Yeah, and another major problem with all these fossil fuel industries and under capitalism, a problem with most industries is something called externalities, which is a painfully boring term, but it's like, it's externality is when companies shift the cost onto us. So there's a cost of fossil fuels. I like saying fossil fuels are poisonous at every step of the process. They're poisonous when you extract them. They're poisonous when you transport them. They're poisonous when you refine them. They're poisonous when you use them, and they're poisonous when you dispose of them. All of those, those are costs that are being shifted onto society. The poor health, the risky future that we're all getting into, and so. Does that make any sense?
Well, it's not just like, for instance, sometimes when we think of the pollution, we think of it, okay, it's going to go on a pallet in the back of a truck, and then it's okay until it gets to the site, and then it starts to be unloaded, and then it's kind of okay until they start to open up the packages. This is not true. All of this stuff is radioactive, and everybody that gets near it gets radiated. And every time they open a valve, there's radon escaping. Radon is like, it gets into your lungs, it goes through your clothes and your skin. This poison is pervasive in the oil and gas industry, and it's underreported for sure.
Mm-hmm. So what do we need to do about it?
Like I said, we just have to keep, reading papers on it. The paper that I referenced earlier was the Center for International Environmental Law, April 2020 study that just came out. It's really, really good. Made a lot of really good recommendations, and just keep ourselves informed and realize that we are a frontline community, and our health department does have a responsibility to protect us. We have no indication that they're even aware of the problems, though.
So if we stop using fossil fuels, we're going to have to, if we stop using fossil fuels, we're going to have to get our energy in a different place. We're going to have to change our system of transportation. We're going to have to change our system of heating. If we stop using fossil fuels, we're going to have to, maybe not package everything in plastic. Is all that feasible?
Okay, just real quick. The total number of miles traveled in cars has grown at less than 1% per year for the past 3 years, and at barely 0.5% a year overall since 2008. The market share loss to the electric vehicles is therefore not likely to be offset by an overall increase in miles driven. So you can't throw gasoline at this problem. Electric vehicles are taking over the market, and the market for cars was already depressed.
I'm a little bit nervous about replacing all internal combustion engine cars with electric cars. Electric cars are partly, any kind of car is going to be responsible for urban sprawl. And the question in my mind is, do we need all these cars? We were talking earlier about how socialism supports capitalism. One example of that is our highway system. So in the 1950s, it was decided that we were going to build this interstate highway system, which caused us to depend on cars. Most people don't have a choice but to drive a car to and from home, to and from shopping, etc. That's not a product of democracy, and it's not a product of the free market. It was a decision that was made by big business and big government. And even at the same time, the car companies and the car companies were buying trolleys and destroying them, buying city buses and destroying them. And I'm just saying that, look down a highway, and if you might see 50 or 100 cars at a time, whether you're talking about an interstate, whether you're talking about Dixie Highway or Shelbyville Road, you can easily see 50 cars at a time, sometimes more. That's not, and you see no trains. That's not an accident. That is a result of a decision that was made for us and not a decision that was made by us. So I'm just saying, if we had democracy, if we had true democracy, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Well, it's never been a fair system. Think about this. I-65 cuts through our city in a very specific way. Old Louisville starts at Floyd Street and it goes over to 6th Street. So look, you know what's on the other side of Old Louisville on 65 is a very depressed community. And the highway itself was put through these communities of color and these impoverished communities on purpose. I mean, the concept of the highway itself is socially constructed to disadvantage certain members of the community. So
you're saying that a highway is more likely to go through a poor neighborhood than a rich neighborhood?
Absolutely. And, if you look west of this 480 corridor, I think I got that right, was it the 480 corridor? Everything west of the 480 corridor is industrial and highly polluted with some of these heavy metals that I'm talking about. You can go to frattracker.org and you can see block by block. And, Hart, you said early in the program that, there were no islands necessarily, but there are. Bernheim is an island. If you're a migratory bird, now you only have islands to get to where you need to go, and these islands are not sufficient to support species, and so it's important to preserve them, but it's also important to get away from these monocultures in farming that we have. We need to diversify. We need to plant trees and stop drilling we need to stop drilling. We need to leave it in the ground.
Great. So do you want to talk about farming? Do you want to talk about ecology, like habitat islands? Do you want to talk about how industrial parks have an effect on the ecology? One thing that continues to impress me is how the Green New Deal is practical. Like a Green New Deal, you think about renewable energy, but you also think about union jobs. You think about transforming our transportation system. You think about transforming the way we get food. You think about transforming our heating and cooling so that you have good union jobs being made. We have the opportunity to create good union jobs with all this stuff. So as soon as we start going in the right direction, then it starts paying for itself. So does that make sense?
I don't know if you've driven down I-64 or 71 east or north of the city recently, but they've been just mowing down trees on both sides of the highway and in the median. It's a project to widen busier spaces of those highways, but the cost environmentally, we were just talking about islands, habitats for birds and other species just decimated, and there is no good reason for it. We need to build away from fossil fuel extraction. You know, huge corporations are writing down it's cheaper for them to leave it in the ground than it is to pull it out and try to give it away right now.
Why are we building more highways? I mean, there's got to be a reason.
Because it's the paradigm that we've been in since Henry Ford, since Lyndon Baines Johnson. You know, he's famous for having built the interstate system. We are stuck in a rut. I think COVID-19 is, you know, it is the chain drawn across the road that's going to stop us. And we're all going to be in midair. We're all going to land on our keisters, and it's going to hurt for a while. But I do think that this is going to pull us out and away from petrochemical infrastructure. I just hate the fact that they haven't gotten it yet, and they went ahead and done and, you know, decimated those landscapes on both sides of the highway.
I feel like going to Metro Council if there weren't a pandemic and grabbing them by the collar and saying, WTF, are you interested in protecting the health and the vitality of this community or not? Why are we taking highway funds and putting them, why are we taking funds from the federal government and allowing the federal government to come into our community and spend money on highways when we know that's the exact opposite of what we need? We need an innovative transportation system, and there's not like one size fits all, but we need trains. We need, you know, encouragement for pedestrians and electric scooters and bikes. And yeah, I have to think that behind the scenes, the oil companies and the car companies have said somehow, some way, bought our politicians, and the politicians might not even know that they're bought, but somehow I mean, can you imagine a car company giving its blessing to a train system? Like, why don't we have trains between Louisville and Lexington, Louisville and Indianapolis, Louisville and St. Louis, Louisville and Nashville? Why don't we have train systems? Well, I mean, Nashville was going to have a light rail system, and it was sunk by the Koch brothers because they got involved and they got people riled up about this. It was somehow going to take away people's freedom. This was a train system that had the support of the mayor, had the support of the business community, had the support of a majority of the population. Koch brothers get involved and sink the idea because it's not in their best interest.
Well, there's something going on here, you know, Danita referred to it earlier, and it's got to do with the upside down way that we, you know, a small percentage, like the top 1%, they say, has more money than everybody else. So when we say there's a grassroots movement, that's a bunch of broke people. We haven't got, you know, that's why it's important for us to keep using our voices to say these things out loud, and shows like this, no matter where we go, we have to continue to say these things and call it out. Otherwise, they will carry on unimpeded.
Okay, so
fighting against greed.
So how do we organize? Go ahead, Danita.
What you're fighting against is greed. That's what you're fighting against.
But
Lives against livelihood.
You can't change greed, right?
Yes, you can.
Okay, talk to me.
Well, there's power in unity.
How about that nurse that was standing in front of those trucks that wanted to go back? They had their flags hanging out of their windows saying, we want to go back to work. And that nurse was standing and blocking traffic. Yes, one person can make a difference.
Oh yeah, but you get like they told me in Frankfurt, Danita, you're here by yourself. What we need to see when we look out that window is thousands more just like you, or we're not going to listen to you. That's what they told me.
No, well, they're wrong. They're wrong about that.
And you know, but I agree with you, Deanna. You know why? Because I was on a mission to have the streets paved here in West Louisville. So I would call and call and call and call and call. And finally, they started paving the streets that I said pave, and I noticed that. But then I got a knock on my door from the superintendent of the MSD or whoever, and he said, let me tell you how this works. You have to have several other people call in. I listened to him and I listened to him. When he finished, I said, you know what? All I see is you knocking on my door.
Yeah,
Whatever I did brought you to my door.
and the streets got paved. So
And the streets got paved. Yeah, that's all I see. So whatever you just said just went in one ear and went out the other. I'm looking at what action speaks louder than words.
So how important is this conversation, not this particular conversation, but how important is this type of activity? Because my dream is for us to step up to the microphone and talk without feeling like we have to be perfect. And I just have this idealistic notion that somehow, some way down the road, that's going to make a difference. But I'm not sure. I mean, I am sure, but I don't know.
It's like this, Hart. I was trying to explain to you about how to combat greed. When a violent person is sent to prison and they're put in a place called a hole, all they can do is think. There's nothing to do, but everything shuts down and they finally think. I think this COVID is a blessing. I know it's weird to say, but we have this window of opportunity to start pouring out letters to these individuals, people in power, pouring out these letters. I'm telling you, it's working because I'm doing it. But I'm not doing it by myself. I built a coalition of neighborhood associations, and I put the stamp, I've got 8 of them. And every letter that I send out, I love Jackie Green. He's got all these names. He don't just hand a letter to the mayor from him. He's got all these people listed on that letter. And that's what I'm telling people. Now is the time that when you send out letters, they have nothing. They're sitting in their homes. There's nothing to do but listen to you. Listen to what you're saying. And you've got all these other people behind you. So our coalition has sent out letters to the Metro Council and got a response. Our coalition has sent out letters to Heaven Hill and got responses. These responses are coming back because I believe that neighborhood associations, the ground roots of everything, have such a big voice. And that's why I united them. So unity.
So how did you organize those neighborhood associations?
Oh my goodness, took a year, Hart. I had to go to their meetings and go to their functions and mix and mingle, and but it took a year. And then they started getting, I guess, as time went on, they got frustrated with certain things, and they heard my voice telling them, imagine you not standing there at Metro Council by yourself. Imagine you with 7 other neighborhood associations behind you. Imagine that.
What kind of things do they want to get done?
They want to get, like right now, everything else is, what was on the table is they wanted to bring some kind of recreational things for the kids. There's everything's shut down. Even the recreation centers, they're limited in their hours, and so the kids have really nothing to do but hang out on the corners and do bad things. So they wanted to bring recreation back to
Sounds fun to me.
And so
hanging out in the corner and doing bad things. That's what I wish I could have spent my childhood that way.
No, Hart, no. But now with the COVID, they just want to help with resources, bringing resources. People that live on off streets don't get the same information that people who live on main streets.
So these neighborhood organizations, how exactly are they coming together, and what are they asking for?
When we see an issue like the TARC buses, all of a sudden they want everybody to wear masks. Well, how do you get that information out to people? That you have to, starting tomorrow, if you don't have a mask on, what's going to happen? So we sent a message out to all of Metro Council and with this, this issue. And sure enough, they wrote, Tark wrote them back and said, oh, you could take your shirt and pull it up over. It doesn't matter what kind of mask. Still, you got to get the information out. So another Metro Council member said, I can get the information out to people, So it starts with the community first. We had an issue and they solved it.
Do you think the people in government are good people with good intentions, or are they?
No, they are not.
No.
Kellyanne
They started out.
Kellyanne Conway said COVID-19 was the 19th virus.
19th.
He wasn't the only government official that said that.
Mm-hmm.
The Secretary of Defense thought until a week ago that this could not be transmitted, this COVID-19. He didn't know it could be transmitted asymptomatically until a week ago.
Believe it or not, it is lack of knowledge. I don't know how they got in office, but it's lack of knowledge.
Well, I don't have to respect them.
No. But you do have to feed them,
Disrespecting public officials is what I like best.
That's right.
Politicians do what you make them do.
Oh yeah, power concedes nothing without a demand. Frederick Douglass.
And my quote was from Ann Braden.
Okay. Politicians do what you make them do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What else do you want to talk about?
By her.
Well, I mean, I just think that the people that are sourcing these materials that go through these pipelines are corrupt, and they don't fully expose the contamination. The guys that gather that frack water waste into their tankers, they're standing there while that valve is filling, and they turn it off, and they get in that truck and they drive it wherever it's going by the hundreds and hundreds every day. These guys are in radioactive situations. They are being radiated, and they're getting sick.
So let's talk about that in particular. So fracking is where you take a bunch of water, you pump it into the ground, you explode it, and then you somehow suck out oil and natural gas from the shale. And you have this wastewater. You have lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of wastewater. And they're wanting it has to be stored somewhere. It's water that will never be used ever again. And they have to store it somewhere. So now they're wanting to store it in the Ohio Valley. Doesn't that sound sweet?
Well, they want to see, what they want to do is they want to put it on barges from the Gulf Coast and bring it up here to Appalachia and re-inject it into these frack wells. Christy was talking about these deep wells that they drilled without anybody's permission. And they couldn't explain what they were for, and they were much deeper than anything could have necessarily been. But, storage of this water is a major issue when they're not able to re-inject it, because the fracking isn't working. So they want to build these barges, and not only barges, but docks. They've applied for docks along the Ohio River for barges to have weigh stations, these barges filled with frack water waste. So not only do they want all these heavy metals floating down into the soils and into the water from these cracker plants, now they wanted to store the direct output on our river in barges and transport it down our rivers in barges.
Actually, I'd also heard that, ironically, they're wanting to store these in caves, the natural gas, now that they have a surplus, all the caves in like Ohio, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, I think Virginia and West Virginia, they're wanting to store them in our Karstar caves, which has a very specific biodiversity that goes back into our water, our well water, our drinking water.
Nothing lives in caves.
Right. But I mean, that's all of our water. It's part of our groundwater. It's our
So
drinking water.
in
I
caves,
beg
I'm
to
sure there's
differ.
fish, there's crustaceans, there's snails, there's bats, there's who knows what all lives in caves.
I beg to differ, Hart. I think we as humans, we live in caves.
Yeah.
Complimentary of LG&E. Turn your lights off only in the room where you're occupying. Turn all your lights off. Turn your heat down. Yeah, that's a cave, Hart. Those are caves.
Right.
Well, the thing about, fracking and drilling for oil, mining for uranium, they inject all of these poisons into the earth and then draw it back out and then draw what they have just pulled. They just re-inject this poison back into the wells. But like, for instance, in uranium mining, if they left the ore where it was deep in the earth, even though it's highly radioactive, it wouldn't really hurt anybody.
Right.
But they're pulling it up and putting it on top of the ground, and then it's blown in the air, it's washed into our streams, and it's extremely irradiative in that way. And the best practice is for them to put it back in the ground and terraform it and put indigenous plants on top of it, but nobody does that.
I would say that a best practice is to not do any mining to begin with. Don't mine uranium. Don't get, stop fracking, stop drilling, stop coal.
Mess with their livelihood, Hart. Bite your tongue.
Mm-hmm.
Mess with
Yeah.
their livelihood.
Yeah, as if these industries exist because they create jobs. Actually, the fossil fuel industries create profits, but it's the innovative industries that create jobs. So if you want to create jobs, you create whole new industries. What creates jobs is technology, the right kind of technology. There's lots of bad technology out there.
Exactly.
Much of what's done with the military, building better bombs and better fighter planes, that's bad technology. So technology is not categorically good. But if we need technology, we need not just technology, but infrastructure and industries and organizations dedicated to solar power, state-of-the-art electric grid. We need our homes to be retrofitted for energy efficiency. We need mass transit. All of that creates more jobs than the same old fossil fuel.
They could
For
do it
that
right.
matter, we need to stop relying on the so-called free market to create jobs, because free market is like Santa Claus. It doesn't exist. Government creates jobs every day. Government gives jobs to firefighters and teachers and soldiers. We need to not have soldiers as much, and we need to have teachers, firefighters, caregivers. We need people being engineers and technicians in solar power and wind power and the other industries I named. We need people to invest in ecological farming, ecological landscaping, and these are all things that would create a public good. And we need to get away from this idea that the people that create jobs are the ones that have all the money. Just saying. Don't get me started.
You could have both.
It's really a medicine show on a grander scale. We've got guys coming through saying, hey, look, if you let me capture that ethane, I can turn it into single-use plastics, and we can sell it to South America and South Africa and Uganda, and we can sell it in these countries that don't know how to dispose of it. They'll just keep asking us for more. It's a sleight of hand. They have shareholders. They get people to buy into their bullshit, and then they have to keep getting money from them. And when they're not satisfied, their stocks go down. It's just a dog and pony show. There's no substance to the fuel industry. There's no substance to the fracking industry. And only a few people get rich.
Well, you know that, and I know that, but most people don't know that. How do we
And the
change that?
other thing about Christie's situation is the cost of that litigation is going to outweigh the cost of having to fight somebody like Christy or Vanessa or the other lady that you had on the radio not too long ago that have property that, you know, they're having to go in, take these people to court to fight them. That is becoming more and more onerous as these industries become less and less profitable. So yes, it's absolutely imperative that they continue to fight, because they took the low-hanging fruit. They took the people that were disabled, the people that didn't have necessarily the means or the time. They went and got them first. And these Christy and Vanessa saw it happening, and they had a little bit of time. And yet these people still showed up on their property and said, you know, there's no house here in Vanessa's case, when there was. You know, he sat outside in their outbuilding and had the interview with her, and she, you know, she filmed the whole thing. So it's just a dog and pony show. You're not seeing what you're seeing. Our president's great at it.
So how do we help people understand that much of what they've been taught and much of what they've been told is false? Or is that the case?
Well,
Or do people know more than I give them credit for?
Cancer screening.
What's that?
Increasingly, all you really have to do to refute the argument is to go and get a cancer screening, because we're all getting exposed to these horrible chemicals. And if you could do, you know, some sort of a graph to show cancer incidence in the past 20 years around these petrochemical plants, it would be a very, very clear evidence how poison they are.
Girl, they've already done it. That's the tsunami I'm talking about.
Rubber Town.
They already done, yeah. They already have the evidence and everything. So why isn't anybody taking this? You know, this guy, and you know, I'll be quick, Hart. This guy, if you ever heard of him, John Hans Gilderbloom, he's professor of urban and public affairs, says that tsunami, and he used that word tsunami, is going to hit West Louisville in the next couple of weeks. This was printed out April the 22nd, 2020.
Tsunami of what?
A tsunami in the form of COVID-19.
Okay.
So there's going to be a lot of deaths, a lot of positive testings here in the next 2 weeks, he said.
We've got about another minute left. And so let's just throw something out, like what would you like for people to know? Anything.
I would like for them to know that they could have their livelihood and we can have our lives. All it takes is for them, instead of using the cheaper way to build things, use the more expensive way to build things. They want fossil fuel.
Deanna, what would you like for people to know?
I'd like for everybody to read this paper that I referred to earlier, the Center for International Environmental Law, April 2020.
What's the title of it?
It's pandemic. Oh, hell.
We'll come back to that. Christy, what would you like for people to know?
What she just touched on with Rubber Town, with the fact of all those chemical plants down there, and the fact that they're already submitted to all those chemicals, whether it was Roman Haas, DuPont, or whatever, with the emissions that they do with air pollution control, that they're already, because when I worked in Park Duval, literally within 2 years of just working down there, people that had no health issues all of a sudden came up with health issues due to the emissions.
It's called a pandemic crisis, systemic decline.
That's a good place to end. It's been fun. And thank you for joining me. We'll have to do this again soon.
Thank you.